You've been exposed to a lot of terms so far in the course, and it's always important to define your terms. Nation building, the term nation building is no exception. In fact, the term nation building itself has both a general and a more specific meaning. The more general meaning, I think, was in general usage when we were first becoming involved with the responsibility to protect doctrine, and we were getting involved in various, usually ethnic-based conflicts in the 1990s. And when some of the experiences we had in those different types of interventions, different kinds of conflict resolution efforts developed, we found that maybe we needed to be more specific and define exactly what we're talking about. So, in general, the original meaning, you might say, of nation building means just halting conflict in such a way that a stable, productive state that honors and observes human rights comes into existence, therefore not really requiring third-party intervention for conflict resolution, becoming more or less a stable, productive member of the community of states in the world. Now, as I'll get to next, we later needed to narrow down that term more and bring it closer to what nationalism means. After all, nation building, the more literal definition of nation building is leaving a state that has been undergoing conflict as a unified nation, with everything that that implies, that all the people feel the same sense of nationalism, which imparts stability to the state. When you think about the strength of nationalism and its persistence, despite the announcements by many that it's going to kind of die out, it remains strong. I think you probably have a sense of that. And so in a way, if you take that specific meaning, you're setting a very high bar. You really, really are demanding quite a lot of conflict resolution mechanisms. So for a minute, consider goals in a particular conflict resolution setting. Naturally, we would like a peaceful nation state to evolve. It'll be very stable. On the other hand, usually these questions are asked. Nation building comes up when a state is a mess, when they've been undergoing violent conflict, usually some kind of sectarian conflict, different ethnicities, different religions, different cultures even, things like that. So that actually led to the derivation of three terms, and I'm going to offer these to you to think about. The first term is, as I just described, nation building, the specific term nation building, which means third parties should stay engaged in conflict resolution until, a unitary nation state results, where everyone really views the members of their state as similar to themselves and, in other words, don't feel threatened by that. In general, studies indicate that can take several generations, and it's not really the goal of third-party intervention, intervening forces, to want to stay several generations, and it's usually not a good idea anyway. Countries should belong to their peoples. So that led to the generation of the term state building. Okay, if you're not going to have a true nation building result, what about being satisfied with the generation of a productive, stable state? That is to say, a piece of territory with a population that has a government that controls the territory while reflecting the will of the people. For example, this could be a multinational state. You don't have to eradicate the differences that perhaps started the conflict. For one thing, it's terribly, terribly difficult to do and is a very long-term proposition. So state building means direct your conflict resolution efforts at developing a functioning, stable state very probably a multinational state, a multi-ethnic state, but one in which the different ethnicities, the different factions involved do not feel so threatened that they organize independent militias or they resist the central government. In turn, the government is not perceived as reflecting the will of just one of the minorities. There are several cases of successful multinational states, and so the idea of state building is more humble than nation building. And we hope that just functioning stable governments and economies, preferably democratic ones that honor human rights, evolve. Now, that too is no small order. So that led to the discussion of a third term, institution building. Institution building means what it says, just that you want to develop the main organizations or institutions that a state needs. So let's get a police force organized, usually along Western democratic lines that honor human rights. Let's get a valid court system organized. And remember, that implies everything that goes with it. That implies a valid prison system. That implies a sufficient number of legal persons, attorneys, judges, and so forth, that you can staff these institutions. Let's get an armed forces put together that doesn't tyrannize its people, that protects its people, and represents its people. Let's get an intelligence community together that is not a secret police. Okay, so you have more specific goals in the case of institution building, and in many ways those are things that you start with anyway when perhaps your goal is the broader goal of state or nation building. If you could use Iraq as an example, we have devised, and helped the Iraqis bring about Western-style institutions in the country. I would say we perhaps have tried to instill a government that the people support. That would be more moving from institution building to state building. But I don't think we have done any successful eradication, if you will, of the perceived differences between the Kurdish people in Iraq, the Sunnis in Iraq, and the Shia in Iraq. If anything, maybe those differences and the hostility is still very much alive. So, nation building has definitely eluded us. So, it is useful to think about which of the three should be our goal, because at some point, the very personal goal of the intervening powers is to leave a country behind that will self-manage itself in a way that respects human rights and can be a productive member of the world economy. I don't have a clear-cut answer for you there. I just offer you those three definitions that, as you reflect on the entire continuum of conflict resolution, which is generally considered to have some form of nation building, state building, institution building at its final stage, what are the useful goals for us to really work toward?